Hi everybody. I've known Jim for more than 25 years and I was trying to think of a word that could summarize what was the essence of Jim. And I came up with one word: open. Open-hearted, open-minded, and open pocketbooks. When somebody needed a hand, Jim was there to support what he believed in, the cultural identity of the Chinese Canadians and Asian Canadians. He was willing to put his money where his mouth was. Open-hearted. He would welcome anybody. When I first met him, Larry Wong and I, he didn't. I was just beginning my writing career and a filmmaking career. Jim welcomed us in and he gave us his bites and thoughts. And the other thing, what I thought, Jim was very open-minded. He would listen and talk to everybody. Jim knew that I was an evangelical Christian. One of the things most of you probably don't know is I had a chance to pray with Jim on many occasions. I don't know what his belief system is, but he was more than willing to listen to what I had to say. Right now, Jim was also very attached to the World War II vets because of them, they helped transform Canada. And today we don't have many of the World War II vets are no longer with us, but we do have a representative of the veterans community. Can I ask you to stand up, please? Can I ask all of us to stand up, please? I'm going to lead us in a soldier's remembrance. Can we all stand up, please? Okay. This is what we say when one of us passes away. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember him. We will remember him. Almighty God, Heavenly Father, thank you for the legacy of Jim. Thank you for this gathering here. Lord, our hearts may be sad, but we know and are celebrate with Jim and Marlene the legacy that he's left behind for every one of us. May you be with us tonight. May you be with the family. Thank you for the food and the time and fellowship. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening. I'm sure that everything that will be said about Jim tonight by the speakers after me would tell you who Jim was. So I just want to talk about my own personal relationship with Jim. You may be surprised to know that I have never been friends with Jim, at least not in the usual sense of the word, because I never lived in Vancouver. In fact, for the longest time, I don't even know much about Jim, other than that he delivered letters for the Canada Post. I didn't even know that he was married until one day when I went to his house, he showed me a picture of Marlene. So why am I here as the first speaker to pay tribute to Jim? That's because he exerted an extraordinary amount of influence on my life, whether he knew it or not. 40 years ago, when Tony Chen and I started the Asian Canadian magazine, we looked west to Vancouver, where a lot was happening. Panda Guy Radio, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. And then somewhere behind in the scene are the fingerprints of Jim, stirring up the awakening of Asian Canadian voices and identity. We even modeled our collective after Jim's, calling ourselves the Asian Canadian Resource Workshop. 25 years later, Jim was an avid supporter of my Chinese restaurants film, helping to promote wherever he can, whenever he can. He even encouraged me a few years ago to write a book about my filmmaking, promising that he will help secure a publisher. Now, I know all that sounds very familiar to all of you. Other times he would call me and ask me to help out on various projects that he was involved in. His fingerprints were everywhere, the last involving a Chinese author's alleged plagiarism of Chinese Canadian fiction. Jim even took care of my health. The last time I saw him, he gave me 10 bottles of enzyme pills, telling me to take 2 a day before I go to bed on an empty stomach. So, in a sense, we were like comrades in arms rather than friends. And his quiet example and caring for others have always inspired me and made me a better person. I will miss you dearly, Jim. Thank you.
Chinese call sweet Hong Kong. It's an island 10 miles long, but the whole world knows Hong Kong through a girl named Susie Wong. Refugees came in big throngs, whole family shared one charm. When their pockets...
Welcome to Chinatown, folks! Ha ha ha! Happy New Year! Ready of things Chinatown travel and tour. We tell Chinatown where we go. Ha ha ha! I tough guy here. Our time Chinese New Year. Boom! Mochi firecracker! Ha 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 ha! But you're my last tour of the day, folks. And on my last tour of the day, no hui. I like to let my hair down, drop the phony accents, and be me. Just me. I figure once a day, I've got to be me.
Things cheap in Hong Kong.
Learn the kung fu fighting, it will make you strong.
And play mahjong. No matter how the world goes wrong, tourists find here a real ting tong. Sing an oriental song. Come to look see old Hong Kong. Want to buy a China gold? Everything's cheap in Hong Kong.
Learn the kung fu fighting, it will make you strong.
And play.
It isn't easy what we do, trying to build community through the arts and history. It isn't easy what we do. We don't get the kind of respect that technology, medicine, or public office does. Heck, even growing vegetables or knitting sweaters gets more respect than writing a poem. Those things you can eat or wear. It isn't easy what Jim did. Jim was a photographer, a poet, a writer, an editor, a historian. Above all, he was an organizer. That doesn't mean he was organized. In fact, in my mind, he was always a kind of a last-minute guy, but he managed to get a lot of things done, usually with the help of his friends. It wasn't easy what Jim did. Most artists can't make a living from their art. They take other jobs to pay the rent and buy food. Jim worked at Canada Post. When I first met him, he had the early morning shift, but he never complained about it, even though Pendergast had a lot of late night sessions. Back then I was a student and everyone complained about not enough sleep. But Jim made time, plenty of time, it seemed then, precious time to spend in Chinatown, building up rapport with its people. And we all saw the amazing results of that investment in the relaxed and trusting faces of the people he caught in his thousands of photographs. It isn't easy what we were trying to do, but Jim made it look easy. Jim had his own darkroom, he developed his own photographs, but he only showed you his best stuff. It seemed as if he couldn't take a bad photo. Jim wrote poetry, and we all know how tricky writing is and can be. But I don't recall him ever complaining about writing or about bad audiences. And then one day, Chinatown Ghosts just appeared, like magic. Typeset blurbed a published book. Boy, was I impressed. Jim made projects look easy because he focused on their bright side. He always pitched the net gain, the benefit to the community. And Jim made never before done things look easy through his own personal generosity, his happy-go-lucky spirit, and his overwhelming confidence. Vancouver's Chinatown had never built or seen a grass dragon, but Jim brought it to life for a Mid-Autumn festival. More magic. Vancouver's Chinatown was losing its history, but Jim stepped in to rescue artifacts like windows and signs, and to dig up stories and heroes like Harvey Lowe, the yo-yo champion. I've been away from Vancouver for 30 years. It's a long stretch, during which I managed to keep up with only a few people here. One person was Jim. Over 3 decades, Jim was always Jim. He was always brimming with new ideas, new projects for the community. He was always meeting more interesting people, doing amazing things. There was never a dull moment in his life. Usually, Jim and I ended up arguing. I thought he wasn't listening to me, and he thought I wasn't listening to him. Well, things won't get easier here without Jim. But you know, things were never easy in this line of work, in the crazy dreaming of artists and activists. There are dreams, and then there is dedication. They go hand in hand, and Jim had fistfuls of both. And that's why we're gathered here tonight. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ramona Marr. I've always thought of Jim as the modern Chinatown godfather. That's because Jim's fingerprints were all over the Chinatown that I was introduced to back in the early 80s when I joined Pendergast. By that time, Jim had already moved on to more literary pursuits, so I never actually got to sit in the studio with him. But I wish I had discovered the show earlier because I think it would have been great fun to be on the air with Jim. What I always will admire about him is his drive and talent for bringing people together to discuss and inspire and to organize, and this is critical, to do, or even more critical, to make you do. I'm sure all of you gathered today have been touched by his ideas and his urgings and his passion. I took a quick look back at my recent email history with him, and it runs the gamut. In my inbox from Wong-Chu at shaw.ca are links to videos, book announcements, and to archival photos. Our most recent exchange was about a suitable date for a Pendergast reunion, and sadly, that one was left undone. The strangest exchange I had was his request for me to track down a specific brand of Burmese diabetic pills in Singapore, where I had been living. In 33-degree heat, I tramped up and down several streets to show baffled pharmacists the photo of a package of dubious pills that Jim wanted to try. My search finally ended in an obscure, shady building upon which I was able to secure a few boxes of the stuff to triumphantly bring back to Jim that summer. Look, when the Godfather asks you to do something, you don't ask questions. You just are pleased to oblige. And so I hope you'll continue to oblige Jim's notions, to celebrate, commemorate, and inspire our community. The one Jim has his fingerprints all over.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce the band. The band's KOKUHO Rose Prohibited, and we've been playing around Vancouver for the last 2.5 years. And our first song is called Midnight Blues. It's a song by Terry Brown. After we tune up. And this is all being brought to you by Break Even Productions, which is a group that was started by Jim Wong-Chu, who is somewhere in the audience, I think, myself, and myself, Rick Shiomi, and Mayu Takasaki, who is the third person. And she is not a man, she's a woman. Somebody asked her.
Chinese Canadian dream machine is making our dreams come true. It's building our culture and identity, and the dream machine is you. Now they've started to tear our married homes apart, our houses and families too. If they can't drive us out, they'll put a freeway there in that Chinatown for me and for you. They're turning our dreams into a nightmare now. Can we stand idly by and be assimilated into the very country that let our culture and heritage die? Chinese Canadian dream machine is making our dreams come true. It's building our culture and identity, and the dream machine is you. Chinese Canadian dream machine is making our dreams come true. It's building our culture and identity, and the dream machine is you. And the dream machine is you. And the dream.
We are the children of the migrant worker. We are the offspring of the concentration camp. Sons and daughters of the railroad builder. Leave their stamp on America.
During those young days, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, Chinatown was going through a change. And a lot of people, young people, went into Chinatown looking for their sense of identity, who they were, what was going on, and just basically trying to answer questions that they are asking themselves. I think that that's how many things began. And I'll tell you, honestly, if I look back at what all I did, and if I had some druthers, I probably wouldn't have started even a half of all the things I did. Because I didn't realize, you know, when you're young, you're a little bit foolish, and you think that at times, you know, you're invulnerable and you're immortal. And I just thought I had all the time in the world. So that's why I just kept going. I added new things to my plate and so on. But then it took a lot out of you. You know, I was working a full-time job as a postman. At the same time, I was bringing all these organizations into being. And you're compelled to do things. And for me, it was just a matter of one after the other. You don't have time to think. In fact, I look back at the time, we spent 20 years on Ricepaper magazine, and I look back at it, and it's almost like we're on crack cocaine, because after we finish the last issue for the year, the grant cycle starts again, and we're hopping onto it. You don't even have time to think about why you're even doing it, or whether or not it's worth doing, or you're successful. You just keep going.
Whoa, yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, hey, Mr. Postman.
Born in 1949 in Hong Kong, but fate ordained that it wouldn't be long till he came to Canada as a paper son. And this is where his odyssey was begun. He was raised by many an uncle and aunt. His knowledge of English was rather scant, but he mastered it well, except for one word. He never learned the meaning of can't. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son, destined to become someone. He worked hard to pay his own way in Chinese family-owned cafes, peeling potatoes every day. He finished high school in '75 and then he went into overdrive. He started to work for Canada Post, but that wasn't enough to keep him engrossed, because a full-time job was just a vocation and Jim aspired to higher education. So he studied at Vancouver School of Art, where photography and design won his heart. Later on, his photographic renditions would be published and shown in solo exhibitions. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son. His illustrious career had just begun. While working and studying, no surprise, he was also one of the Pender guys who brought Vancouver's attention around to Chinese Canadians in Chinatown. Then something happened that was rather nice. He published a poem in Inalienable Rice. He took creative writing at UBC and published a whole volume of poetry while carrying letters for Canada Post. His poems were published as Chinatown Ghosts. The first Asian Canadian poetry publication, a historical event that spread his reputation. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son, setting new records one by one. Yes, Jim was more ambitious than most, a true man of letters for Canada Post. A master of the art of gentle persuasion, he was a co-founder of AlliterAsian and a co-founder of LOWE, raising awareness and appreciation, leading to mainstream penetration and recognition of Asian Canadians. He received medals for his contribution to harmonious cultural diversity. The Queen's Golden Jubilee, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Talk about mainstream validation. Jim got royal affirmation. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son, cultural crusader, second to none. He never shied away from criticism. His poems were models of witticism, like this. And you wonder where the yellow went when you brush yourself with permanent. Brighter and brighter, whiter and white, 99 and 44 100%. By any means, bleach your jeans, and when they fade, you got it made. He was such a gentle fellow, you might think that he was weak. He was strong, but he was mellow, and he could write and he could speak. I'm so glad he was friends with me, because I wouldn't want to be his enemy. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son, as gentle as Attila the Hun. His candle burned at both ends. It could not last the night, but for his foes and for his friends, it gave a lovely light. Home is a sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son. Well done, Jim. Well done.
Different story about my mom though. She always wears her silence in front of father. Funny though. None of us, brothers and sisters, ever woke when they made love. And it must have been often because there are many of us. But some knew that they were not wanted. Those are days before birth control pills and condoms, at least the cheap ones. We were poor. Funny though. Father never gave her money to buy food, preferring to buy it himself, but she fed us. I never understood this. In the morning, she'd be up before us, fixing our breakfast joke. And after packing us off to school, she'd start to wash by hand. Cold soap water, wooden washboard, hand wrung. Headless forms hung on bamboo poles, skewer shirtless like flags, rolls of crucifix baking in the hot, dry wind. While we sleep in our one-room home, she mends last of tomorrow's clothes and quietly waits for her father.
Thank you very much, Winnie. Good evening, everyone. What a wonderful opportunity to share and celebrate Jim's life. I first met Jim in 1973. I just returned to Vancouver and met up with a group of young people. Yes, we were young once. That was some 44 years ago. And I realized there are people here who are not even 44 years old. Well, we young people decided that Chinatown, Chinese-Canadian issues were very important to us. So we talked. We got angry. We got organized. We strategized and we took action. It helped us to ground for many years to come. When Jim was in the hospital, I reflected back on the many conversations I had with Jim, and what was the best one that I could remember? Well, my best memory of the conversation with Jim was in the fall of 1979. I was home alone with our baby son. My wife had gone out, so there I was. And Jim hopped over. He hopped over and we just had a wonderful chat. He kept me company. There I was, very nervous with our baby son. And Jim kept me company. I can't remember what we talked about. We may have talked about Penderguy Radio and its reporting on the barbecue pork issue, or on the National Film Board disastrous film on the Chinese-Canadian community, or maybe on barbecue pork issue. Or maybe we talked about the hopes for the Chinese Culture Center. We probably talked about photography, as we were both photographers, but I do know we did not talk about poetry. That was more me than him, okay? Whatever we talked about, I know there was a relaxing time for me. Jim helped me feel at ease. Our baby son could feel that I was at ease as well. The following day, I had a conversation with Paul Yee and said, "Hey, Paul, Jim hopped over." "Yeah?" "Yeah, and he helped me feel really at ease with the baby." We all have our best memories of conversations with Jim. For some, it's about the challenges, the evolution of Chinese-Canadian literature and authors, organizing against racism. But for me, it's going to be that fall day of 1979 when he hopped over to keep me company with our baby son. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for celebrating his life.
In early Canada, when railways were highways, each stop brought new opportunities. There was a rule. The Chinese could only ride the last two cars of the train. That is, until a train derailed, killing all those in front. The Chinese erected an altar and thanked Buddha. A new rule was made. The Chinese must now ride the front two cars of the train. That is, until another accident claimed everybody in the back. The Chinese erected an altar and thanked Buddha. After much debate, common sense prevailed. The Chinese are now allowed to sit anywhere on any train.
Thank you, David. I first got to know Jim around the time of the Saltwater City exhibit at the Chinese Cultural Center, chaired by Paul Yee. And it was my cousin Hayne. You just met Hayne. Hayne is my role model. He's my older cousin. I always called him Bilgo, and I'm not embarrassing him right now. But when I got involved and got to know what Jim was doing, Hayne said to me, "Be careful, Todd. You will get pulled into Jim's projects." I did. And I don't regret it. Because over the years, it was like, I guess I'm like a comet coming in and going into Jim's orbit and just getting pulled in. And I would write about it. I started a blog. I worked on the Simon Fraser University paper. And that's how I got to know what the what was it? The Go for Broke review was, because that was a precursor to Asian Heritage Month. So I got to interview Jim and Roy Meeke and lots of upcoming writers and people. And I attended the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop dinners and the presentations of the Emerging Writers Award, because that's what Jim wanted to do. He wanted to encourage the young writers. The first person to receive the Emerging Writers Award, Rita Wong. Are you here tonight? She will be. Later. Madeline Teen. Later on, Catherine Hatashida. There's one other person who received it. Philip. Philip Nguyen, are you here tonight? There you are. Okay. Emerging Writers Award. And then next, the latest person, Catherine Hernandez. She will be here later this month for the LITERAsian Festival. Now, when I was working for Vancouver Public Library, and then Jim said, well, let's get the libraries involved. So, pulled in the program committee, and then he'd bring me down to Richmond Public Library, and that's what Jim did. He brought the communities together. And when Wei-Sin Choi was the One Book, One Vancouver choice, and Paul Yee was in town, we said, hey, we need a dinner, because Jim liked to eat, okay? But Jim says, it's not just Paul Yee and Wei-Sin Choi we're going to recognize. We're also going to recognize Roy Ma, one of the founders of Chinatown News, big influence on writing. And then the next year we followed up with the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop Community Builders Dinner. Fred Wah, you're here. And we recognize Fred and Roy Meeke. Is Roy here too? He's sitting right next to you. Great. We recognize Harvey Lowe, and we also recognize the NAJC, the National Association of Japanese Canadians, the Bulletin. John Endo Greenway, you're here. Do we have any editors from the NAJC Bulletin here? Where's John? There's John. There you go. And John, you're going to speak later, so I won't steal your thunder. Excellent. In about 2000, Jim invited me to join the ACWW board, and he saw me doing community events, and he said it was time for me to do things in our community. That was important, and this is what Jim did for us. He said, Todd, we're going to build more things. We need to do that. For Gung Haggis Fat Choi, he would always come out and inspect the menu. We created deep fried haggis 1 ton. We had lots of fun with that. And that's what Jim did. And I think one of the last things that Jim did for me was he came to visit me in the hospital when I was there after heart surgery in January, and he wanted to tell me how to get better. And we had our next meetings to plan LITERAsian, and here we are planning LITERAsian. We're going to keep Jim's legacy going. We're going to make sure that we encourage the emerging writers. We have renamed the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop the Jim Wong-Chu Emerging Writers Award. And so on your table, you have the postcards. Please come to LITERAsian. Thank you very much.
Well, after I published my book, Chinatown Ghosts, I turned around and I realized that this is the first book in English about Chinese in Chinatown. And I realized at that point we had to make some change. If I'm the first book and it's 150 years since the Chinese have arrived, and I'm the first, then we have to do something about it. That's where the inspiration for Asian Canadian Writers Workshop came from. We have to create a mechanism to help writers publish. And so so what I did was I dropped my pen, I stopped doing creative things, and I started doing grant writing. So out of there, we created the Rice Workshop. The Asian Heritage Month became, because we need to embrace a larger context and a concept of being not just Chinese and Chinese in Chinatown, but we needed to embrace it in a larger context so that it embraces the entire Asian migrant community. So Asian Heritage Month became out of it. And yes, I ended up writing grants for that, and in between that doing an 8-hour job as a postman. So, I mean, I was really killing myself doing these things. And I mean, I'm glad that it's done. And my only fear on why I kept going was that I was really a fear of failing. And it was so easy because in my early days, every time I walk away from a project I was doing, it collapsed behind me. It seemed like I was the one leading, and if nobody wanted to follow and nobody was willing to take it on, it was gone. So I wanted to make sure that Asian Heritage Month and Asian Canadian Rights Workshop, these organizations, were in good hands, financially and in succession.
I'm not sure what Jim's view on Pan-Asian cuisine was, but I'm pretty sure he would hate it. But I sort of saw Jim as the original Pan-Asian, and he was very generous of spirit. Although he was rooted in the Chinese community, I really felt that he had an open heart and opened, as that last video said, he opened his heart to all Asian cultures, and I really value him for that. And I also value his, as someone alluded to earlier, his odd emails that would pop up in my email box periodically. In fact, he played some music earlier, and Mayu said, "Oh, I think that's Hiroshima from California." And the other day I found an email from Jim sending me a set list from one of their albums saying this is one of my favorite bands. I'm not sure why he sent it to me, but there it was. Anyway, when I heard that Jim had his stroke and all the troubles he went through, I was really heartbroken by that, although I tried to remember all the good things about Jim. And every morning for the past while, for my own health, I've been walking down, we live on Heritage Mountain in Port Moody, and I walk down this trail down to Burrard Inlet and walk around the inlet to the park and then back to my home and start my day. And the day that I got the email that Jim had passed away, I put on my walking shoes and I walked down to the inlet. And as I was walking along the trail, these, I can't claim to be a poet, but words came to me. So I would walk and think, and I would stop every now and then and type them into my phone. And these are my thoughts of Jim. And it came from a place of seeing Jim as always there, like the same way that Chinatown seems like it's always been there and always will be there. A little bit dusty, a little bit, not necessarily the most shining tower, but it's always there. So this is for Jim on a beautiful path. Although it's strange because I would never associate Jim with this path or this trail. I always saw him as more of an urban cat sitting down eating noodles. So it's a bit strange. Jim Wong-Chu is ever there, ever in the cracks and creaks and dusty folds of a well-paged book, in the crook of arm wrapped tight round precious string-wrapped package, there in the hidden passageways of a Sunday morning Chinatown, ever in the long drawn-out breath of story, long and winding through the ever-shifting alleys of history, there in the squeaky wheel of a creaking cart laden with steaming bamboo baskets. Jim Wong-Chu, paper sun, a grain of sand in the belly of the whale, a child of the migrant worker, of the Chinese waiter, of the railroad builder, born and raised in the laundry room. Jim Wong-Chu will never grow old gracefully, woolen scarf wrapped against the growing cold, sitting in the well-worn chair of his father's father and his father before him. Jim Wong-Chu is ever there, evermore, never far from Maine and Kiefer, from the hum and thrum of it all, of Chinese opera and beat of drum, a dim sum summer fading into winter melon. Not forever, but ever there. Thank you.
What prompted you to write Jimmy the Waiter? I worked all my life as a waiter, more than any of the other professions inside of a restaurant. And there's something about being a waiter, also being in the service industry, and especially if you're Chinese, is that sometimes the hostility, the bad food, the bad humor, the drunks, for whatever reason, okay, the scorn that's heaped onto you often touches onto the racial barrier. You get called every name under the sun, and especially, it relates to your skin. So there's a rule that in the profession says that you never razz a waiter and you never speak ill of a cook, because you know what's going to happen to your food before you get it. Here's to Jimmy the Waiter. I caught him picking his nose and flicking the snot into the cream of mushroom soup. Well, that's for calling me a chink. I know him, and he wouldn't hurt a fly, but would think of nothing while serving it up, the crackers.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends of Jim, I am honored to be in your presence today. My name is Eric Lee. Jim was my friend, mentor, and peaceful warrior. Jim Wong-Chu changed my life. He taught me, 1, you have to prove that you are more powerful than your dreams. 2, if someone can do a better job or has better skills on hand, make way for them. 3, do not be distracted by things of little value. He then said, my success is seeing you succeed. Jim elevated me as a man of integrity, peaceful with his patience as I continued to grow. Furthering Jim's love for community was his appreciation for humanity. He resonated with individuals living in silence and inspired many to speak through photography, poetry, and writing. I am one of those individuals. Our friend Jim saw the good in others, and he taught others to see the good in themselves. He forged a place in history for Asian Canadian identity, and moreover pioneered a working platform for infinite creativity, for cultural expression, and identity for all ethnicities. Jim's wisdom was a combination of knowledge and life experience. The application of both created the philosopher in him. He shared his life theories openly with me and many others. He enjoyed sharing food and stories, bringing people together and building community. Jim never withheld knowledge, a helping hand, or even a meal. Even after his passing, Jim is still bringing people together today. Though his body and breath has silenced, I believe that through us all, we can carry Jim's spirit boldly and loudly into eternity by honoring his life work, outstanding achievements of upholding his legacy in arts, community, and supporting the health of humanity. Jim, We miss you. I miss you much. Thank you.
邊個話我傻傻傻？我請佢食燒鵝，通街話我傻女傻妹，實在我未傻，我傻。
Many-mouthed birds is a Chinese expression meaning those who disturb the peace. It's the title of a new anthology of Chinese-Canadian writing, poems and stories from 20 emerging writers who are living in the divide between two cultures.
Well, the term many-mouthed birds is a colloquialism, and essentially what it is that there are people that speak out of turn, and often it's true, but it's not, that they weren't supposed to say it yet or say it then. And anybody that would want to speak the truth usually are chastised. So in that way, the Many-Mouthed Birds, the book, is a way of allowing people to speak out and to talk about what they feel they want the world to know. I'm a writer by compulsion. I never wanted to write. In fact, I only had grade 10 education. You see, what was going on was I spent a lot of time in the community. And I feel, I did a lot of, filled up a lot of forms for a lot of old people. And these old people began to tell me their life stories because they're so pent up in them, and nobody has listened to them, that when somebody finally wants to listen or somebody accidentally trigger off something, it was like a hurricane of information. And there's some powerful, powerful stories of pain, suffering, isolation, loneliness, but also a lot of triumphs and a lot of humor. And I began to fill up with this. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I would get up, and it's almost like there was somebody on the back of me saying, write this. There's a lot more, a lot more admiration, a lot more interest on the outside. And in the community, the only thing you can do is make yourself so obnoxious that they can't, they can't ignore you. They can't ignore you, and that's the whole thing. That's what we're doing. That's why we call ourselves Many-Mouthed Birds.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chinese style, be quiet. Today is a happy and a very sad day. I know you're here because you all love our very dearest Jim Wong-Chu. Every week, never fail. Stories he think of, historic documents he accumulated, or what's happened in Chinatown. Who's this? Who's that? Jim, you're a night owl. You would write me at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would respond you at 5 o'clock in the morning. So we keep good company, Jim. I know you're here, Jim. You're the sun that is shining upon us. You're the moon that is glowing, beaming on us. You are there. You are here. You are the soft breeze that blows to us, to tell us to carry on. So will you please rise with me and give a toast to Jim. Jim, God bless you in God's paradise in heaven. Lots of love to Jim. To Jim! Thank you, Jim. God bless all. Happy time, everybody. Good health, good fortune. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I've known Jim for, I think we met in about 1970, and we were actually introduced by Asian American poet Ronald Tanaka, actually, way back then. Anyway, I've written this this poem, I guess my tribute to Jim Wong-Chu. It's called Jim Wong-Chu. Hang on, which is a good name for it, right? I gotta get the right page, hang on. Okay. Jim Wong-Chu, the paper son, the Sifu, the Pender guy, the dragon man, Jim Wong-Chu, photographer, Qatari taiko player, Go for Broke, Chinatown Ghost. Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, Emerging Writers Award, Ricepaper, Jim Wong-Chu, the AlliterAsian. Brother Jim, historian, Epicurean, Foos Ho Ho patron. Brother Jim, pioneer, community builder, ball carrier, cultural hero, the people's poet. Brother Jim, we thank you. Brother Jim, we love you. Thank you.
Good evening, Marlene and family and friends. My name is ESMIE, an advisor at Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society that Jim co-founded, and surprise, surprise, a friend of Jim's, a visual artist. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at Jim's celebration of life, and thank you to Elwin, Alan, and all organizers. Tonight, I'd like to celebrate with you the Jim I knew. VAMS is where I first met him a few years ago. I came to know him as a man of ideas who embodied a huge store of knowledge. I also came to know that he was very generous in sharing his vast wealth. So I was on the receiving end of info about many things, including, as I hear from all of you, health choices in food and remedies, and where to purchase them. I think I must have amused him with my responses because he teased me about how wide-eyed I was about everything, and I always went home with a pack of old magazines that he had, as well as some of those dried remedies. With Jim, I was always suspicious about something. I'm almost certain that he delighted in throwing me into the proverbial water just to tell me that I can swim. That was the case with the First Families, First Stories project he and I embarked on in 2013. The project was created under the VAMS umbrella to showcase the achievements of pioneers in each Asian Canadian community. With little specific guidance, he encouraged me to gather a team from the Filipino community to delve into our immigration into British Columbia before 1970. Our team included Ted Alcuitas, Mel Tobias, Melissa Briones, Irene Kirubins, Sandy Gillis, the Philippine Canadian Inquirer, the Filipino edition, and One Radio. Resources were scarce, and I felt like we were grasping at straws. However, we prevailed, and Jim simply said he knew we would. Tonight, I'd like to share with you a portion of one of the videos we produced in our community. Please watch Jim explain the rationale for the First Families, First Stories project, as it emphasizes one of his traits that I admire most. Besides ample knowledge and spring of ideas, Jim embodied inclusiveness. He genuinely cared about all people, and he wanted them to feel like they belong. I am fortunate to have worked with him, and though we will miss his physical presence, he will live on through the love of his family, people he mentored, projects he championed, and ideas he generously shared.
First Family, First Story project is timely, but also for the Filipino community, I think it will transform the community, bring knowledge and also self-awareness to it. I think this is a collective effort. It's a collective consciousness, and I don't think that the Filipino First Family, First Story project is going to be any different from all the other ones that we're going to do. We're working with the Indonesian community, we're going to look at the Persian community, we're going to be looking at the Korean community. All these communities, collectively, when they bring their experiences together, you're going to see a collective voice, and also you're going to see parallels between the histories and how they connect and intersect. Each one will learn from each other, because they are all part of colonial history, part of what has happened to bring them to the present, and then how did they all come to Canada, and what kind of things have they done since. Once you have a consciousness and you're aware, then you're compelled to go out and seek out and find ways to express that and find ways to make sense of it all. And I think that that's really what we want communities to do, to come to terms with what they find, but also in some ways evolve consciousness, a Canadian consciousness about the information and then direct their community towards it.